For a view from the crossbench, I want to bring in Independent MP for Fowler, Dai Le. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, PK. Great to be part of the program again.
Start where we left off there with Dan Tehan. The Coalition announcing their immigration policy this week. It's been criticised by some, including former Prime Minister Paul Keating, who called it racist. What did you think of the policy?
I was at a citizenship ceremony this week. We welcomed at Fairfield City Council about 600 new Australian citizens, and I looked across that 600 new citizens along with their families is a very multicultural Australia. And the week before I was at the Liverpool, about 200, again, multicultural communities of welcoming 200 new Australians. And I am who I am, and I think that whether or not I question the term use, Australian values, because I did the hashtag called Australian values, because I thought, what does Australian values mean? And I think if you dig down, the word Australian values is the value of mateship, the value of fairness, the fair dinkum, and it's about giving people a fair go. That is this, I think, what is the Australian values, in addition to the whole, democracy, liberty, the right to speak, the right to protest, the right to express oneself. And I think that is the universal values. But I think the mateship, fairness, and, giving each other a fair go that's what is about the Australian values. So I don't know who the coalition was referring to in terms of Australian values and what do they mean by the Australian values. And I think that's more for me of a question. I have no doubt.
Do you understand why some people see it as loaded and it's been criticised because they are of the way that they've framed it?
Look, I only heard part of what was in the social media or in media about what Angus Taylor said around the word Australian values. I did not, I've got a very multicultural community here that I am part of, and I am constantly out there in the community. So I really didn't kind of spend that time studying what the coalition policy was around. But all I heard was around the word Australian values. And for me, that is raising the question. So I wasn't going to judge, what their policies about. I mean, I'm not part of the coalition. I'm not part of the government. For me, it's about how do I best represent my community and what the policy is of the government or of the opposition. How does that actually impact my community, and how do I best stand on that platform and say, hang on, we represent Australian values here in Fowler, very much so. And so, do we fulfil the Australian values, the people that Angus Taylor identifies? I don't know. That's up to Angus Taylor to say. But for me, we're very much Australian. Now,
the Prime Minister, Australia rather, to be clear, has been criticised by the US President for not being part of their mission to in the Strait of Hormuz. Australia says we didn't get a formal request. Should we be very, very careful about this relationship? How do you view it? Does the Prime Minister need to call the US President to clarify why he keeps repeating the claim?
Look, I think it's not just the Australian Prime Minister, but I think global leaders have already said, they weren't informed, they weren't told what was happening. And my stance on the President Trump has always been that he's unpredictable. He will say, and he'll, say things that sometimes really sound really out of this world. But that's President Trump. For me, I think, the Prime Minister has so far has been saying, we're not involved and we're not going to be involved. And the focus, I hope, for the Prime Minister is that to focus on the Australian public, the Australian small businesses, the people that are struggling at the moment with the crisis that's happening in the Middle East. And that should be his priority, is to ensure that how do we ensure that we get fuel security, fuel affordability and supply chain resilience. And I think that is the focus in this, with this budget coming up and with potential interest rate rises. how do we ensure that our Australian, people are protected and buffer as much as possible. Of course, we're now living in a global economy. It's very hard. We feel it at the Bowser here in Fowler, in Southwest Sydney in particular, because of the low socioeconomic, families. We have low socioeconomic population. So we will feel it more here, I think, than anywhere else. In communities like Fowler in Western Sydney, in Southwest Sydney, where families are working in factories, driving trucks, deliveries, all of those, low-paid jobs that are, they have to constantly be on the road, and they constantly need those vehicles of trucks and diesel. So they are feeling it the most out here in our community. Do
you think the Prime Minister's trip then through Asia was a good thing to do to try and secure some deals to get more fuel into the country?
Look, I'm glad he's able to secure, that one extra day of fuel. But obviously that's not going to be enough. What can we do more to structurally change so that we actually feel secure for future crisis? And I think we need to use this crisis at the moment and plan for Australia's security in the future, because we can't constantly do this. He can't constantly travel to other countries and say, give us, fuel, give us oil, give us whatever, because we need to ensure that we have the capacity to provide locally here for the Australian public.
Thank you so much for joining us.